The sky cracked open with a sound like tearing metal. People looked up from their homes, their cars, their cities. A massive ship appeared in the clouds, so wide it blocked the sun. It wasn't flying, it was hovering, like it didn't care about gravity at all. Then more ships followed, 30, 50, maybe 100. The world froze in silence. The invasion had begun. They called themselves Valorians, an ancient immortal race. They had no hunger, no disease, and no death. Their skin was like silver glass, their eyes glowing with cold fire. They didn't speak Earth languages, they just broadcasted their message into every mind at once. We are here to bring order. You are to obey. There was no war in the beginning, no bombs, no missiles, no resistance. Humans were shocked, confused, afraid. The Valorians landed in major cities, setting up towers, using machines that hummed with alien energy. They didn't kill anyone at first. They simply told humans to kneel, to serve, to accept their place in the new order. Some did, hoping to stay alive. Others watched silently, waiting. The Valorians believed this meant victory. To them, humans were just wild animals, unruly, emotional, weak. They had conquered dozens of planets before. To them, Earth was just another stone to step on. But they made one mistake. They thought humans had already lost. One of the high generals, named Lorthan, stood over the burned remains of New York's Central Command. He turned to his second god and said, "No resistance, no threats. These creatures are done." The second in command hesitated. "There are whispers," he said slowly. "Some of our scouts have gone missing." Lorthan laughed, a strange, vibrating sound that echoed in the metal hulls of their ship. Missing from these short-lived insects? Absurd. But later that night, 3 more patrol units disappeared. Their last reports said they were moving through a forest outside a human city. Then, nothing. No bodies, no signals, just silence. The Valorians sent drones to investigate. What they found wasn't expected. Burned trees, melted armor, and signs of high explosives. But no human tech could do that, not the kind Valorians had seen before. And no humans were found, alive or dead. Lorthan stared at the images, frowning. Something felt wrong. He called for a full sweep of the region. 10 elite warriors, armored and armed with energy weapons, were dropped into the forest. Only one came back, crawling. Eyes wide in terror, he whispered just one thing before collapsing. "They were waiting for us." Lorthan didn't laugh this time. Across Earth, strange things began to happen. Human supply convoys started moving silently at night. Valorian towers began to malfunction, blinking with error codes no one could understand. Their machines were being hacked, jammed, or destroyed. But the humans were never caught. They struck from shadows and vanished like ghosts. Cities that once seemed quiet now hid rebels. Every alley could be a trap, every basement a war room. And worst of all, humans weren't afraid. They looked at the Valorians not with fear, but with something else: calm, cold patience, the kind of patience you see in hunters before the kill. In a hidden bunker deep underground, a group of humans watched a screen. One of them, a former engineer, pointed to the satellite feeds. "They think we're disorganized," he said. "Let them." The others nodded, their eyes hard. "We've studied them. We know their weak points. Their overconfidence is our weapon." Outside, the world looked conquered. But inside the hearts of men and women, a storm was growing. And somewhere in the shadows of Earth, the first phase of Project Iron Veil had already begun. The immortal race believed they had won, but the war hadn't even started yet. And when it did, the gods would bleed. The Valorians stood in a shining hall made of metal and light, floating above the clouds in their command ship. Watching Earth with quiet pride, their generals believed the war was already over. They believed Humans were wild animals who had finally accepted their masters. But in a hidden mountain base deep beneath the Rockies, human resistance leaders were not planning survival. They were planning a counterstrike for weeks. The Valorians had been observing human behavior from orbit. They didn't understand why humans weren't fighting openly. They expected riots. Tanks, missiles, but got silence. It made the immortal invaders feel powerful, but they couldn't see what that silence meant. They couldn't feel the tension in the air, the way humans moved in shadows, whispered in codes, and disappeared underground. The humans were not afraid. They were preparing. The Valorians didn't know humans had been through worse. They didn't know about Hiroshima, Chernobyl, world wars, starvation, and plagues. They didn't understand that a species that had suffered for thousands of years didn't break so easily. They captured a human in Zone 9, a man in his late 30s, face covered in dust, eyes too calm for someone in chains. They dragged him into an interrogation chamber, pure white walls, mind-reading tools, energy fields. The Valorian Inquisitor leaned close, his voice echoing inside the man's head without words. "You are nothing. Your kind has fallen." But the man smiled, slowly, his mouth bloody, teeth cracked. "We were just giving you space," he said, "so you'd walk deeper into the trap. Before the alien could respond, the lights flickered. Then the alarm screamed. Red beams blinked from the walls, and a cold mechanical voice spoke in the Valorian language. "System breach. Unknown virus detected. Security compromised." The Inquisitor turned, trying to activate a command console, but the screen glitched and filled with human code. The captive laughed, stood up without being stopped, and whispered, "Told you." Then everything went black. In orbit, Valorian control ships began to report strange malfunctions. Artificial gravity twisted, engines slowed, communication networks crashed one by one. Their systems were not just damaged, they were being rewritten from the inside. The Immortals had never faced enemies who could learn. Human engineers had studied Valorian tech for weeks in secret bunkers, analyzing their code, their machines, their patterns. They didn't need centuries. They only needed pressure, pain, and a reason. The resistance wasn't made of soldiers only. It was made of hackers, farmers, nurses, students, and broken men with steady hands. One small virus had brought down an entire command ship's defense grid. And that was just phase 2. The Valorians had forgotten something. Humanity doesn't win by being stronger. It wins by being smarter, by being angry, by never giving up. By day, Earth was quiet. Cities under alien control. Humans walking slowly with heads bowed. But at night, whole communities vanished, leaving empty towns behind. To the Valorians, it was strange, unimportant, not a threat. To the humans, it was positioning, movement, setting the board for a bigger play. One general finally saw the pattern. He stood alone in a tall tower, looking down at a sleeping Earth. "These creatures are waiting," he whispered, but his warning came too late. 10 command stations across the planet exploded at once. The shockwaves ripped through the Valorian networks like wildfire in the chaos. Human forces emerged from underground with weapons made from alien tech mixed with old Earth steel. They struck without mercy, without fear. The Valorians didn't understand what was happening. They had never fought an enemy who used failure as fuel. Never fought a species that grew stronger by losing. The war had begun, not with banners or speeches, but with silence, sparks, and one human smile inside a white room. The biggest mistake the Immortals made was not coming to conquer. It was assuming humans would never fight back. Now they would learn, one lesson at a time. The hard way? Asterisk. Asterisk rain fell gently over the ruins of Sector 12, where once stood a human city. Now only ash and steel remained. To the Valorians, It was just another cleared zone, another order restored. But below the broken streets, something else lives something. Quiet, moving, planning, in the dark, beneath rubble and sewer tunnels. A young woman named Allah connected old human tech to stolen alien parts. She wasn't a soldier. She used to be a librarian. Now she was building bombs. Her hands were steady. Her eyes tired, but her heart was firm. Above her, alien boots marched along the surface. Scanning for resistance, they didn't know she was there. They didn't know dozens like her were scattered beneath their feet. The Valorians had begun sweeping the underground zones more aggressively. They sent elite hunters into old metro tunnels, thinking they'd flush out the last of the rebels. They didn't realize the tunnels were not random. They were built to trap, not just by chance, but on purpose, by humans who had learned from every loss. The Valorians entered in lines, their armor humming with light, weapons ready. They moved through the tunnels with perfect formation, but with each step, the walls seemed to close tighter, the air heavier. They passed rusted train cars that still smelled of oil and smoke. One of them touched a wall, and the power flickered for a split second. The commander stopped. Something felt off. Then came the whisper. Low and soft in the dark. You shouldn't have come here. An explosion tore through the left corridor, crushing 3 soldiers instantly. The rest turned to fire, but their shots hit nothing. Then the tunnel lights turned red, and the old metro signs above them blinked. One word showing again and again: welcome. Hidden in the walls were human-made devices, SEMP charges, sonic disruptors, plasma mines, all wired into a trap. These weren't standard weapons. They were experiments, brutal and unstable, but they worked. The tunnel collapsed behind the Valorian squad, cutting off their exit. Allah watched from a tiny screen miles away, her face calm. Now, she whispered into her comlink. All across the tunnel system, humans rose from the dirt. Faces covered, hearts burning. They didn't scream, didn't shout. They just attacked. Fast and silent, the Valorians, who had never tasted fear, now struggled to see in the smoke. Their suits sparked. Their shields failed. They swung blindly. Their orders lost in static. One tried to run, slipped on blood, and was pulled into the dark by human hands. Only 2 soldiers made it back to the surface. One of them was half burned, the other trembling, his eyes wide and glowing strangely. He spoke just 4 words before collapsing. They knew we'd come. Later, in the Valorian High Council, commanders argued in sharp tones. They are unpredictable. One said, they are primitive. Another replied, but clever. One general stood silent, watching a map of Earth glowing with red dots each, a human base they couldn't reach. What creature fights from below? He asked softly. What kind of people hide in the dark and wait? None had answers. But the truth was already spreading through the Valorian ranks like a sickness. This war would not end quickly. These humans, short-lived and flawed, were fighting in ways no one had prepared for. They weren't following rules. They were rewriting the game. And under every city, every broken structure, every ruined zone, the traps were waiting. The night sky above Earth looked peaceful from space. Stars twinkled, clouds drifted slowly, but aboard the Valorian flagship, alarms blared. They were losing contact with ground teams. One by one, their towers were going silent. No signs of human armies, no big battles, just quiet disappearances. It didn't make sense to them. Valorians had ruled entire solar systems for thousands of years. They were immortal, their technology far beyond human science. And yet, Earth was becoming a graveyard. General Varric stood in front of a glowing screen. Watching another signal blink out, he clenched his silver hand, not in fear, but in confusion. What are these creatures? He whispered, down on Earth, in the outskirts of a ruined industrial zone. Something was happening. A young girl named Mira crouched behind a burned-out vehicle. Wires and batteries spread out before her. She was only 16, but her hands moved. Like a master engineer, her father had died 2 weeks ago in a skirmish. Since then, she hadn't cried, not once. She'd been building. The device in her hands was a mix of alien energy core and old Earth's tech refrigerator coils, computer chips, and copper wire. Beside her, 2 resistance fighters waited silently, watching the tower ahead. A giant metal spire with humming rings. Used by the Valorians to control gravity and communications, they called it a nerve tower. Myra finished connecting the final wire and whispered, "Ready." The others nodded. Then one pressed the remote. Nothing. Happened for 3 seconds. Then the sky cracked open with light. The tower shook, sparks rained down, and the air shimmered like heat waves. Mira's device had worked. The core inside exploded, not outward but inward, creating a localized distortion that pulled the tower in on itself. Like it was collapsing into a tiny black hole. The sound was deafening, then suddenly gone. Silence. When the dust cleared, the tower was gone. So were the Valerians guarding it from orbit. The flagship registered a massive energy loss. Varric slammed his hand on the console. How? He barked. How are they doing this? A voice from behind answered calmly. They are adapting. It was Commander Sorel. It's one of the few Valorians who had fought in ancient wars. They use what we discard. They learn too fast, she said. Varric turned to her. But how can they match immortals? Cyril stared at the earth for a long time, then said quietly, because they are not trying to live forever. They fight like they have nothing to lose. On the ground, Mira sat on a broken pipe, breathing slowly, her ears ringing. Her hands were black with soot, but her eyes shone. One of the resistance fighters handed her a small metal badge. "You're one of us now," he said. She nodded, already thinking about her next creation, elsewhere, in old subway labs. Human scientists were decoding alien language patterns in mountain caves. Engineers were testing plasma rifles made from scrap. They didn't wait for governments. They didn't beg for mercy. They simply acted. The Valorians came to conquer, but the humans were changing too quickly. They weren't just resisting, they were evolving. Wind howled across the broken plains of what used to be Eastern Europe, once full of lights, towers, and human life. Now the land was mostly dust and wreckage. The Valorians called it a cleansed sector. To them, it was a success. A quiet zone, fully pacified, but under the cracked soil, inside the shattered buildings. Something dangerous had taken root. Humans. The Valorians didn't realize that when humans lost everything, they didn't break, they sharpened. A young man named Roan walked through the ruins, carrying a pack made from torn alien cloth and leather. He wore armor made from scrap, painted black with red streaks. He moved like a ghost between shadows, eyes always watching. Roan wasn't part of any army. He didn't have a rank or a flag, but people called him the human weapon. Because wherever he went, something exploded. He didn't use fancy tech or massive guns. He used traps, fire, movement, and silence that day. Roan was heading toward an old outpost held by Valorian troops. It wasn't heavily guarded. Only a few immortals stayed there to manage supplies. But Roan had a reason. Inside that post was a prototype Valorian healing pod, something that kept their soldiers alive, regenerating injuries in seconds. Roan had lost his sister to one of those soldiers. Now, he wanted to make sure no other immortal healed again. He arrived just before dusk, crawling through sewer pipes, then moving through vents. He studied the guards for hours, learning their movements, their routines, their blind spots at midnight. The sky thundered with alien drones passing overhead. Covering the noise of his entry, Roan slipped inside, planted 3 timed charges, and used a small pulse device to blind the cameras. Then, Just before leaving, he stepped into the healing chamber room. The pod stood there, humming, glowing, pure. And cold Roan stared at it, eyes filled with rage and something else calm. He placed a small canister at the base, opened a valve, and said nothing. As he exited the facility, an old man in a cloak stepped out from behind a wall. "You did it." The old man asked. Roan nodded once. The two of them walked back into the ruins without looking back. A minute later, the healing pod burst into blue flames, followed by the explosion of the entire outpost from the orbiting ship. General Lorthon watched the camera feed turn to static. He clenched his jaw. "These insects are cutting out our heart," he growled. But it wasn't just Roan. Across the world, humans were targeting Valorian life support systems. They weren't just attacking soldiers anymore. They were hunting the very things that made the Immortals immortal, and it was working. A report came in one Valorian elite commander had bled to death during a skirmish in the Amazon zone. Another was found dead in a cave, armor crushed by collapsing rocks. No regeneration, no recovery. The Immortals had never needed to fear death. Now they did. The humans had figured it out, and Roan, the silent fighter with no flag, had become a legend whispered across rebel channels. The man who made a god bleed. The Valorians had come to Earth thinking they were above all life. But they forgot that mortals don't fear death the same way. They fight harder, they burn brighter, and when cornered, they bite. The stars above Earth flickered faintly through the vastness of space. But aboard the Valorian orbital cities, panic grew. Humanity was no longer a simple planet to conquer. Their attacks grew sharper, smarter, and more deadly. The Valorians' ancient cloning chambers, which had created endless soldiers for centuries, began to fail. Machines that once hummed perfectly now sputtered and died. Their immortality vaults, holding the secret to eternal life, were being breached and destroyed. From deep underground bunkers, human engineers transmitted hacking signals faster than any alien code could block. They had learned the language of their enemies. They turned alien tech against its masters. Old Earth scientists and young hackers worked side by side. One young woman named Lyra watched the breach reports flood in. Her eyes shone with fierce determination. "They think their power is unbreakable," she said. "But they don't know what it means to fight with heart." The Valorian leaders called for emergency meetings. They had never faced a foe so clever and relentless, their centuries of experience. "We're failing them." The war stretched from hours into months. On Earth's surface, human resistance groups grew bolder. They captured alien weapons and improved them. Plasma rifles glowed in human hands. Alien shields were hacked and turned off. Whole cities lit up with the fires of rebellion. Valorian fleets tried to respond with massive strikes, but the humans moved fast, vanishing before retaliation. One day, a Valorian commander sent a message pleading for a ceasefire. He spoke of exhaustion and loss, of cities burned and soldiers dead. But the humans answered with a single word: no. They had tasted victory in the darkest hours. They refused to stop, 'cause they knew the Immortals' greatest fear. And now, death was knocking at their door. The last Valorian emperor sat in his shattered throne room. The walls around him cracked and glowing with flickering light. His empire, once proud and endless, was crumbling. Across Earth, the humans did not celebrate with noise or pride. They moved with quiet strength, ready for the final chapter. The Emperor's voice echoed through broken speakers, a broadcast to every human, every survivor, every hidden rebel. "I ask for peace," he said, his voice weak but clear. This war was a mistake, a misunderstanding between species, but the humans remembered the cities burned. The children who screamed, the skies that once held hope, now filled with shadow. A general named Kale walked into the ruined alien capital alone. No army behind him. No weapons but his courage. He faced the Emperor with steady eyes. "You came to conquer death itself," Kale said, "but you forgot one thing. Humans never stop fighting." The Emperor looked down, silence filling the room. Outside, the stars shone bright, and with them, the promise of a new dawn. The immortal empire fell, and humanity rose.